Though I never intended to fall asleep, I actually found it to be quite nice. In the black void of unconsciousness, I returned to my previous state of holding no motivation. Sleep distributed no pain and no rage, and yet it wasn't quite right. While it was undoubtedly refreshing to wash away all my newfound worries, I wanted to reach out again. I deeply desired something beyond those worries that could only be obtained by going through them. For only a moment, for only a mere second, I clasped my soul around rage and felt the essence of victory rush through me. A click in the silence followed by a whoosh jolted me awake. I was sat down crouched in my tube while I slept, but at that moment I found myself already standing outside it. Fortunately, this time I had not run into the wall or the floor. I looked back at the tube, and a tiny part of me wished to return to it, but I resisted the temptation. The musketeer skipped to the now open steel door and stood standing tall just in front of it, followed by the rather slower Dark Prince and Sparky. She turned her head gradually towards me with eyes that stared far beyond my physical form and were likely implying that I should seriously hurry up. The moment she looked away, I found myself terrified of the fact that my perfect opportunity had arrived. After but a moment of hesitation, I unsheathed my glistening sword and hid it behind my back. I let go with my left hand before placing it directly onto the blade. The razor-sharp edge sat still on the top of my hand before I violently forced it across it. Shrieking flames of pain exploded all around the cut, nearly causing me to faint. Hastily, I resheathed my sword as the purple elixir simply slid off of it and wiped any on my left hand across my right, as the cut itself was clearly visible on my left. "Help! I'm turning into Elixir!" I screamed at a man as he came through the steel door. He wore a white lab coat and bore short brown combed hair. He peeked his head towards me as I rapidly approached with over-exaggerated heavy steps. I threw out my right hand towards him, allowing everyone in the room to see that he was covered in deep purple elixir. "You have to do something. I feel like I'm melting," I screamed, easily faking the worry in my voice with help from the actual pain in my left hand. "But that can't happen," said the man, attempting to take a step back. "I don't understand. They said it couldn't." The man took another step back and continued. "No, we just don't understand. I'm sure this is normal." Tears running down my cheeks, I lifted my left hand, now so covered in elixir, the cut itself was rendered invisible. "Please, you have to do something." Okay, I'll see what I can do," said the man shakily. He swiftly turned to the other troops and blurted out, "Just go to the waiting room. I'm sure she's going to be fine." Practically sprinting down the silvery white hallways, we made it to another massive steel door. Halting the growth of the elixir trail I was leaving behind me, we stopped and the man shoved a key through the door. A moment later, he hastily motioned me to go inside the dark room that he soon followed me into. The room was covered from top to bottom in drawers and cabinets that, as usual, were almost too clean. However, and quite fortunately for me, the room itself was not. All sorts of peculiar items lay on top of cabinets, and in some cases just the floor. After a moment of examination, my eyes locked onto a large stone bowl directly across from where the window in the steel door would be facing if it were closed. Taking note of its location, I turned to the man, now rummaging through one of the cabinets, and laid my hands on the hilt of my sword. "I'm sure you'll be fine. We just gotta prove that there's no major problem, and I can send you on your—" The man's sentence floated unfinished through the silent room as the pain of being gruesomely impaled ran through his body. Sword in his chest, he looked up at me for a second, our eyes locking for what felt like much longer. I let go of the sword and ran across the room to the stone brewing bowl. A white sheet of instructions lay folded in half next to it explaining how to make the zap spell. Though adjusting my eyes to see real words rather than ones randomly appearing in my head took longer than I hoped, I eventually managed to fluently understand the writing. "Insert 2 cups of elixir, stir for 1 minute, then insert a crushed ishroom and mix for another minute," I read out loud, making no effort to hide the panic in my voice. I lifted my left and right hands above the bowl and allowed my elixir to drain into it. I clenched my eyes shut from the pain but quickly found that it was dissipating. I opened my eyes again to realize that the massive cut on my left hand wasn't so massive anymore. Shimmering gold sparkles popped in and out of my vision as my wound rapidly sealed itself shut. I gave a sigh of relief at both my sudden lack of pain and the fact that there was still an acceptable amount of elixir in the bowl. Taking a deep breath through my nostrils, I began calmly opening and peering inside of the many drawers and cabinets around me. A tinge of worry returned as I failed to find anything that matched the description of Ishram, but said worry was hyperinflated when I noticed the outline of the man's body on the floor next to me, my sword still planted in his chest. I ripped my gaze away and tore open another cabinet to find dozens of brightly colored mushrooms neatly planted in silver pots. A wave of relief washed over me as I found a blue mushroom with the word Ishram labeled on its specific pot. I gently pulled it from the dirt underneath it and carried it back to the brewing bowl. After stirring with a wooden spoon nearby for what I expected to be roughly a minute, I crushed the mushroom in my dried elixir-covered hands, where it turned into a blue powder that slipped right through my fingers and into the bowl below. After another minute of stirring, I looked back at the recipe for the zap potion and read, "Pour into a zap pot glass before twisting a lid on top." Taking another deep breath, I opened the cabinet below the bowl, which I had previously found said zap pot glasses. I snatched a vertical rectangular glass bottle and lifted it to the brewing bowl. Soon enough, I had it filled almost to the brim and screwed a dirty brown lid on top. The zap potion held in my left hand, where the cut used to be, I reached out my right as I neared the conspicuous body, which I refused to look at directly. Perceiving the smooth gold hilt of my sword, I clenched my eyes all the way shut and began to whisper, "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you. I only did what I had to." I wiped away a batch of beady tears from my face, but found that I made no attempt to move. I knew I had to escape and find the others, but I felt as if I had to know that the man would be okay. Except, it soon became abundantly clear that that was not remotely the case. He did not move, no matter how hard I hoped he would. I slipped my sword out of his chest to find that it was not drenched in elixir. A foul-smelling crimson-red liquid soaked my blade, but unlike elixir, it did not simply slide off. It stuck to the smooth edges as it dried and darkened. The rough metallic smell of the liquid pierced my nostrils like a needle, but didn't leave me with any new word, but rather one final tear that shrunk into nothing before even having a chance to fall off my face. Though the hallways were lit at every corner with bright lights from the ceiling, a dim feeling swept over me as I ran through them. If I can't even find them, will it all be for nothing? I wondered, wiping what could have been any sort of terrible liquid off my face. A gasp escaped my mouth as I turned a sharp corner to find an open door ahead of me. I froze in place and attempted to peer through the doorway from across the hall. The wide form of the dark prince came into my view just as a flurry of pattering footsteps from behind me rang through my ears. I burst forward, my chainmail-covered limbs clattering from side to side. The instant I passed through the door, I jumped to the right in order to be out of sight from the hallways. Unfortunately, the musketeer had to dive out of the way in order to avoid collision. Falling to my knees, the Dark Prince helped the musketeer get back on her feet before they both peered at me hopefully, though the Dark Prince was proportionally more hopeful than the musketeer. His eyes widened enough that you couldn't even see the top and bottom edges through his vision slit in his helmet. Panting wildly, I forced my flimsy arms to hold out the rectangular glass containing the zap spell for all to see. I regained some composure as I myself really examined the spell for the first time. Though I had known it bore a dark blue hue, I had never noticed the countless white cracks that flashed haphazardly within the liquid. The musketeer chuckled, saying, "You found it all right. I just hope it's worth that stunt you pulled." Recalling said stunt, I felt my heart sink to the bottom of my stomach. A small but firm voice somewhere in my head whispered, "Can you even use the spell? Knowing what you did to get it." I knew I should have fought back against it, but I also knew it was right to ask. The worst pain I had experienced thus far was that of the P.E.K.K.A. splitting my torso in two, and there yet I had effectively done the same to the man without any threat from him. At that thought, I realized that I had in fact felt a worse pain. The pain I was feeling in that exact moment. The musketeer dived forward once again, barely clasping her hands around the zap spell just before it would have smashed across the floor. "What are you doing?" she screamed, springing back to her feet. Clutching the spell hard enough to shatter it in her hands, she spat, "I'm still not even sure what you had to do for this, but I'm not going to let you throw it away." Finally noticing the expressionless stare I was looking at her with, she crouched down to my level and continued, You had the guts to make this spell a reality, even when I told you it was impossible. I don't know what's going on with you, but I do know that I need you to snap out of it so you can actually get something out of your efforts. Victory has never been so close. Please just let yourself have it. The pattering footsteps outside the room returned, except this time sounding like they had picked up an extra pair. A skinny woman wearing the same lab coat the man had marched into the room, escorting a plump old man with a long black beard. Here they are. You have 15 minutes to prepare, said the woman dryly. She proceeded to turn 180 degrees and marched right out of the room. Taking a sizable inhale through my nostrils, I stood and turned to the man. Indeed, I felt as if whatever I had done getting the zap spell was terribly beyond my possible comprehension, but that didn't mean I should waste it. I wasn't completely sure if the musketeer said what she did for me or for herself, but I decided it didn't matter. She and the Dark Prince had done nothing wrong, and therefore didn't deserve to continue eternally suffering at the hands of Yosemite. Hello, I'm the musketeer, and this is my squad of troops, said the musketeer, motioning towards the rest of us. Since when was she in charge? I wondered, attempting to hide my chuckling at the question. We'll tell you everything we can about ourselves so you can have the best chance in the arena, etc., etc. She continued. Finding that no reply came, she said, Anyways, I'm really great for taking on fights from far away, and You think I care? Interjected the old man. The musketeer waited somewhat patiently for him to explain why he might not, but no answer came. Leaning next to me, the Dark Prince whispered, When we actually get to meet the challenger, they're almost always crazy excited to fight. Like they all think they're the one to defeat the champion. Well, this may just be our man then. We just need him to cooperate a bit, I said, a slim smirk forming on my lips. Stepping forward, I stood as tall as I could and indignantly stated, If you don't care, then we won't. You can only survive this if you let us help you. Standing next to me, the musketeer supported me with, This whole I don't care attitude of yours isn't going to get you anywhere anytime soon. The man let out a sad chuckle as he replied, That's just fine. I more than deserve whatever happens to me. Through clenched teeth, I asked, Maybe you do, but do we? I lied when I said we don't care if you don't, because we're going to fight for you anyway, even if you are a sad old man that thinks he's past doing any good. Appearing taken back at this, he replied, You have to fight for me. I didn't make the decision. It's just the way this cruel world works. Sighing, I said, You don't seem to be getting the point. You want to pay for whatever you've done, but you don't have to do it by taking whatever is forced upon you. I turned to the other troops and continued, Yosemite, the current champion, needs to be stopped. I don't know what you think you did, but I can assure you, he's caused 10 times the suffering with a tenth of the effort. If you're actually sorry for what you've done, you'd at least attempt to stop someone who clearly isn't. Running his hand through his beard almost too forcibly, he replied, People know how long Yosemite's been champion. I know how long Yosemite's been champion. I considered the idea of beating him, but that was just a foolish man's way of ignoring his own faults. Successfully concealing a smile, I said, You're just scared. You decided you can't do it, so now you won't even try. Sounds to me like the foolish man is the one standing in front of me now. Without waiting for the man to deflect the statement, I continued, We found a way of beating Yosemite, but we need you to make it a reality. I paused for a moment to look directly into his eyes before continuing, Your help is enough to redeem you in my eyes. While just taking your punishment head-on won't warrant anyone's forgiveness. The musketeer's stare turned to an amused grin as she asked, So, are you going to help us or not, man? The man sighed and replied, My name's Rasmus, and yeah, I guess I should. Not another smirk, but a real smile lit up my face as I said, Well, Rasmus, I'm glad to have you on board. What I need you to do is simple but very important. Simple or complicated, I'll do it. While I'm still not sure if it's enough to redeem myself, I'd only be digging myself a bigger hole if I stood by, said Rasmus, making direct eye contact with the floor. More so talking to the group than Rasmus specifically, I announced, Here's what we gotta do. When the battle starts, Rasmus will deploy me and the Dark Prince at the right bridge. I pointed Rasmus to the Dark Prince so he knew who I was even referring to. Then he will similarly deploy the musketeer and Sparky next to his tower, where they will have plenty of space to attack from afar. I pointed at Sparky. I figured, mumbled Rasmus. Smirking, I continued. We will use Zap to deal with the skeletons, then me and the Dark Prince will buy Sparky some time to charge so we can get rid of that pesky P.E.K.K.A. I searched everyone's facial expressions for possible questions, but found that they all seemed to have a good idea of what they had to do by either excited or bored looks they bore. The solid metal door swung open as the lab coat woman marched back into the room. Time's up. The battle must start soon, she informed Rasmus. All right, let's just get it over with, he replied, as if she had been pestering him for hours. The woman turned to me and the other troops and asked, Are you still waiting on Donnie? As usual, said the musketeer, intensely inspecting her nails. Well, if he takes any longer, you're going to have to go back on your own. We especially need everything to be in order for today's battle, so I can't go looking for him yet, she said, practically dragging Rasmus away. Having returned to our room, all the tube doors swung open, prompting the Dark Prince and Sparky to enter them. However, before I could as well, the musketeer tapped me on the shoulder. I'm trusting you'll actually use this, she said, plopping the zap spell into my hands. I nodded, but before turning away asked, Does teamwork call to you too? Rubbing the back of her neck and looking down slightly, she replied, Yes, actually. I typically like doing stuff myself since that's who I can trust, but with this, I felt like it was your job to do. Her makeup-colored lips formed a genuine smile as she continued, I haven't felt this close to victory in a while. Thanks for giving me that. We both entered our respective tube and exchanged a nod before I heard a tiny whoosh above me. Just as I looked up, the silvery card gently tapped my face, flinging me into the vast emptiness of the void. Opening my eyes, I found myself in the arena once again. Standing in front of the bridge with the Dark Prince, I could make out the P.E.K.K.A. already on its way towards us. Completely surrounded by skeletons, I turned to see the musketeer and Sparky at Rasmus's tower, lifting a weight off my shoulders. That being that Rasmus might change his mind. Though he didn't have to do much, it was clear he was sufficiently devoted. Shifting my attention to the oncoming horde of skeletons, I lifted the zap spell to my mouth, but found myself too perplexed to drink it. Inside the blue liquid, tiny dots of purple formed and spread apart, clashing with the bright white strings of electricity. It's all right. It'll still work, said the Dark Prince, taking notice of my hesitation. I figured this would happen, but the transformation is young enough that it shouldn't be an issue. The rumble of the countless tiny feet of the skeletons alongside the enormous metal boots of the P.E.K.K.A. shook the ground around me. I hastily unscrewed the lid and began gulping down the spell before it could return to Elixir. Light shocks burst across my tongue and down my throat as the otherwise sweet fluid emptied from its container. However, for only a moment I tasted something else that stuck out like a sore thumb. One of the elixir splotches brushed against my taste buds, conceiving a vibrant sensation upon it. While the zap spell itself tasted sweet, the elixir was different. It too held the same elements you would describe as sweet, but it energized me slightly, and would be better described as felt rather than tasted. The whole bottle already gone, I found myself wishing to taste the elixir again, but my mind was swiftly ripped away, where my focus was instantly directed towards picking a target. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, or how I knew it to be the case, but I had a pretty good idea. Directing my pointer finger at the P.E.K.K.A., a blazing bolt of lightning flew down from the sky, splitting in a multitude of directions as it fell. Each smaller piece of lightning struck an individual skeleton, instantly evaporating them into a puddle of elixir. Stunned for only a moment, the P.E.K.K.A. made a mechanical groan before lifting her leg forward and commencing her marching once again. Metaphorically screwing my head back onto my shoulders, I turned and nodded to the Dark Prince as he stepped in front of me with his shield raised. I turned back to the musketeer and Sparky to find that only one of Sparky's 3 rings had so far lit up. Not even wielding her musket, the musketeer pursed her lips and gazed out towards the P.E.K.K.A. before turning back to Sparky and yelling something inaudible at it. The instant the P.E.K.K.A. crossed the threshold of the bridge to bright green turf, a speeding arrow hit, then ricocheted off her steel face. I had forgotten that the towers themselves would help us defend, but clearly it was for good reason, as they weren't much help against the P.E.K.K.A. What worried me at the moment was whether or not we would have to face the same thing on the other side of the arena. Both me and the Dark Prince slowly backed away from the P.E.K.K.A. as she approached, now only increasing in pace. A loud bang rushed past as a speeding musket ball struck a small dent in the P.E.K.K.A., followed by another ineffective arrow. I turned back again to find both the musketeer reloading her rifle and Sparky now with 2 lit rings. A deafening slash caught my attention as the Dark Prince's shield crumbled to tiny metal pieces under the extreme force of the P.E.K.K.A.'s greatsword. The Dark Prince jumped back and braced for impact as the P.E.K.K.A. lifted her sword once again, but just chuckled when a distant beep from behind us sounded. For only a moment I gazed upon the P.E.K.K.A.'s dent caused by the speeding musket ball. I wasn't sure at the time if I was crazy, but I could have sworn I had seen the same elixir we were all made of, flowing in beady droplets down her shoulder where the dent was struck. I let out a shriek as the massive blue and white mass of the Sparky's beam collided with the P.E.K.K.A. and blasted her back to the bridge. Pitch black smoke rose from the colossal hole in her chest as a single robotic sob echoed throughout the arena. I looked down at my glistening gold chestplate to discover it drenched in elixir that quickly slid off and soaked onto the turf below. The P.E.K.K.A.'s chest pumped the same elixir out onto the bridge and on the ground as her black metal began cracking apart and crumbling to purple liquid. Not a thought went through my brain as I crouched down and dipped my smooth finger in the pool of the P.E.K.K.A.'s gore. I soon found that that same finger was halfway into my mouth, where it was spontaneously licked clean. I savored the luscious flavor of the elixir as it slid down my throat, but was overcome by a primal sense that something had gone awry. What are you doing?" asked the Dark Prince, shakily pointing at the finger still dipped in my mouth. Snapping back to reality, I dropped my head and frantically attempted to spit the elixir out, but to no avail. Just a moment ago, I had learned that the P.E.K.K.A. was made of elixir. I had of course known that the skeletons and even Sparky were as well, but I never considered the P.E.K.K.A. might be. I saw her as Yozmite's personal hand of destruction, so it seemed safe to assume that she couldn't understand the pain she was causing, or else she wouldn't in the first place. I spit out what little elixir was still in my mouth and gnawed down my throat as I regained my stance. I realized the sweet sensation I had tasted was exactly that of victory. Clearing my mind, I decided that I hadn't come up with the plan to win, but to stop Yozmite. That was why Rasmus agreed in the first place. Sparky and the musketeer stopped behind us as the musketeer said, "It's been a long time since I've seen the arena so not gruesome." All the elixir-based remains of both the skeletons and the P.E.K.K.A. had long gone, merely leaving the turf slightly darker. Across the bridge was Yozmite's tower, guarded by another smaller version of it on both sides. Though difficult to be sure, Yozmite looked like a large man who seemed to be sitting atop the tower paying us little to no attention. Audibly laughing through his metallic helmet, the Dark Prince said, "We're here. We could actually do this." "Then, let's get this over with," I replied, unsheathing my gold and silver sword. Sighing, he said under his breath, "You can't just enjoy it, can you?" There was no sign of Yozmite even being remotely aware of our existence until we reached the turf on his side of the vast arena. In a flash of glistening gold light, 3 scaly but not exactly lizard-like creatures appeared directly above us. Bearing tiny blue wings, they circled around for a moment, growling and swiping their razor-sharp claws, more as an intimidation tactic than an attack. Before we could prepare for the inevitable conflict, however, a speeding arrow whizzed inches by me and punctured the Dark Prince's black chest armor. Grunting loudly, he tore it from his body and stepped back onto the bridge, followed by the rest of the group. Waiting just outside the tower's firing range, the flying blue creatures above darted down towards us. One zipped past the Dark Prince, managing to slice a tiny cut into the side of his neck. Another tried to do the same, but found itself furiously crushed into the stone floor of the bridge by the Dark Prince's mace. The last creature dived for the musketeer, but was shot out of the sky by another speeding musket ball. Its screech blared all the way down as it fell in a spiral motion, the body thumping on the cold turf below. I reached out to the musketeer, saying, "No! You can't! Did you hear the scream it made?" The smirk on her face was wiped away as a wave of confusion washed over her. She looked back at the creature's half-obliterated body as what remained drained its elixir on the ground. Stuttering, she replied, I don't know. I guess I heard it. Unclenching my fist, I said, I'm sorry. You had to do it. My fist immediately reclenched their maximum ability as the Dark Prince caught and crushed the last of the creatures with his bare left hand. I gasped and turned away, wishing I had any real ground to chastise him on. Of course, there was none, so we had to continue. Recalling the P.E.K.K.A. had effectively been able to ignore the tower's arrows, I suggested, let's try hiding behind Sparky. I'm sure the arrows won't do too much to the metal and wood. Yeah, let's try that, replied the musketeer, apparently still fighting off her new stutter. Lining up behind Sparky as it slowly rolled over the edge of the bridge and onto the turf, another golden flash of light made me jump, almost getting hit by a ricocheting arrow in the process. 4 bald, green-like men wielding the same daggers the skeletons had burst towards us. They were roughly the same height as the skeletons as well, so it wasn't intimidation that caused me to hesitate. One of the 4 stopped right in front of me and pulled his dagger behind him, preparing for a strike. I shot my hands out in front of me to shield myself from the inevitable pain to come, but it made no difference. The instant the spiked strings of suffering ripped through my skin, my sword was well on its way to being unsheathed. I sliced the goblin-like man directly in two, flinging elixir in all directions. I gasped once again as I realized what I had done, a wet tear dripping down my cheek as I processed that another poor soul had to endure the same pain I so feared at my own hands. I turned my head to the Dark Prince, unfortunately witnessing the other 3 men effectively shattered by a sideways swing of his mace. The screams they made in the tiny moment they remained in those bodies sent a freezing white shiver up my spine. Even in light of the carnage at hand, the whole group became entranced as something I had grown to feel great shame for was revealed to them. Both the Dark Prince's cut from the flying creature and his puncture from the arrow slowly sealed themselves in gold-glistening light that sparkled about frantically. He and the musketeer turned their faces to me, where it became glaringly obvious that the exact same shining effect was emanating from my sword. Feeling the arrowhead-shaped hole in his armor where there was no wound to be found, the Dark Prince asked, "Did you know you could do this?" I hesitated, then lied. "No, I had no idea." Sparky rocketed backwards as it fired the same blue and white beam of light at the tower, instantly reducing it to gray and brown rubble staining the ground. "We have to finish this," I said, stepping out from behind Sparky. Waiting for the others, I took a moment to inspect my hands, and, as I expected, found them to display no sign of any cut. As we marched towards Yosemite, we discovered that there was no resistance attempting to stop us. The robotic sob that P.E.K.K.A. gave in her last moment on the battlefield told me everything I needed to know. Not only did the P.E.K.K.A. feel all the pain caused to her, so did the skeletons, and the flying creatures, and the short green men, all of which only felt it because of me. There I was on a journey to rid the world of Yosemite for the pain he'd caused by making it myself. Even my ability to heal myself, and now my friends, only served to remind me of the treacherous actions I would have to take every time I did. The following minutes went by in a blur, where I felt strangely like I had before any of this had happened. When I sat crouched in the tube with nothing but silly questions about my existence, except it wasn't quite a neutral experience. I sat in one of the few spots where the turf still shone bright green as I witnessed the destruction of Yosemite's tower. Sparky's beam burst through it, leaving it almost no better than that of the previous tower to fall victim to me. Though with this tower a few chunks stayed intact as they hit the ground. Unfortunately, one of which held a completely alive and uninjured Yosemite. Despite who he was, and the terrible things I thought of when hearing his name, I didn't find myself wanting him to feel the pain I knew he soon would. He immediately jumped off the pile of rubble and ran, but was swiftly caught by the Dark Prince. Restraining Yosemite with his left hand, the Dark Prince raised his mace high above his head and slammed it down with the force of 1,000 furious men. That dreaded color appeared once again. A bright red flew in all directions, accompanied by an ear-piercing scream. Said scream turned to skull-shattering as the mace struck again, but Yosemite was not dead. Imprisoned at the crimson and purple-stained hands of the Dark Prince, Yosemite was not dead. His right arm tore from his body, leaving its socket gushing, but Yosemite was not dead. Howling through each coincidentally treacherous yet non-lethal blow, Yosemite was not dead. The final strike produced no scream. The now red mace made one more collision, and Yosemite was dead. Soon enough, just the same fate would come to Rasmus as well. By all means, victory had been achieved.